My name is Hani Abdulatif, and I have the honor to be your lecturer in this semester. Um, what I will do, as I said, if you bring your devices with you, that would be great because we'll do some online activities. If you have seen my post yesterday, so I can see if you already have their laptops and devices with them, which is great. So that is something I do encourage. So please bring your device with you. So you still can use your mobile phone as well. So we're going to carry on after the three sections or the three blocks that you have already covered with Dr. Nikos, and I'm hoping that you will enjoy this section or this part, this is the second semester, as much as I'm sure you've enjoyed the first one, and I'm hoping that you will even enjoy it more. So I'll do my best to do this, and I'm hoping that we work together to have really a good experience, to give you a good experience in this module. So before we start, I usually start with some rules, and these are very basic rules for all lectures, for all my lectures. So I always encourage people to prepare. So please do read before you come. Try to know what we are going to discuss in the lecture, and what applies to the lecture obviously applies to the seminars or the tutorials as well. So please do read, engage with the discussion. I like to hear different points of view. I like to hear challenging views actually as well. So you wouldn't be able to do this without reading enough about the material or about the topics that we cover. So please do prepare and read. And as I said, feel free to challenge any ideas or any theories, because that is actually very positive if you not just know theories, not just understand theories, but you also challenge theories and ideas. So please enjoy the module. And as I said, I'll do my best to give you a really good experience in this module, but I expect you to help me to do so as well. So we both are on the same team, so we'll try to do this. So hopefully you will enjoy. As I said, we will have some online activities, but these are also some resources that we can use as well. So Hanomics is my personal website, so I might be writing or posting some stuff. I will forward the links to you. Also, there's a Hanomics YouTube channel. I usually post short videos in case if we'll see how we go with the material. So I might be posting these on YouTube, but if I post something else, obviously I'll put it on Learning Central, so you will be notified. But feel free to subscribe if you want. Not trying to increase the number of subscriptions. Socrative is the platform where we're going to do the online activities during the lecture. So that's why I kindly asked you if you can bring your devices with you. So obviously it's going to be more convenient if you have a laptop or a bigger device like a tablet, but you still can use your mobile phone, so it's fine. So it's just the idea you're going to be typing stuff. Sometimes there are like short answer questions that you will need to write 1 sentence, 2 sentences maximum. So it's not going to be too much writing or typing in to respond to these questions. But I think it might be just more convenient if you have a tablet or a laptop. But as I said, a mobile phone should be fine as well. So please go to socrative.com now if you can. If you have your device with you, we'll come back to this as we go. So whenever you see the Socrative sign, that means there's a question on Socrative, and I would like you to answer that question, or there's something to respond to on Socrative. Socrative is very good in that in the sense that it actually give like a full report at the end. So that's why I encourage my students always to enter their names, their real names, and their email address. So I can, if we need to, we can go back to these and we can go through your responses if you want to. If you want formative if you want feedback in your work, on your understanding during the lecture. So it is very helpful. I tried it for a few years, and I do like it. And from the feedback I receive from my students, they always like it, because we have a record of all the responses. We can go back to any of these, and also I encourage people to talk and to discuss issues and topics during the lecture, so you can discuss with everyone else. But also it's good for those who don't want to speak or to discuss these and with others, but they still can engage with the material through Socrative. So please go to socrative.com, and next time you'll see this logo sign Socrative. That means there's a question that you need to answer. Just you don't rush through the question, because once you log in, once I give you the room number, you will need the room number to access the questions or the activities we have. But once I give you the room number, you'll have access to all the questions that we need during the lecture. But don't rush through these questions, just follow the slides, okay? As I said, this is a continuing module, so we're gonna build on what you have already covered in the first term in the autumn semester. So in the autumn semester, you have covered 3 blocks, and as you may know, the module is or consists of 7 blocks. So what you have covered so far is inequalities, growth and development, measure what we mean by economic development, what do you mean by economic growth, how to measure it, and these are very fundamental and very, very basic concepts that you need to that I'm sure you have covered well in the first semester. Okay, the differences between growth, what's the difference between growth and development, etc. So all these sort of hot issues are actually covered, but we're still gonna discuss these as we go along as well. Also, you have covered different theories of economic development and growth. You talked also about society, institution, different types of institution, how the structure of institutions, how different types of institution, culture and norms, values can help or can hinder economic development. So this is something that you have covered in Block C. So these are the 3 blocks that you covered in the first semester. And this semester, these are the blocks that we will cover: factors of production, how they aid or hinder economic development. So basically, we'll cover the role of agriculture in this lecture. Next lecture, we'll talk about the other factors of production. The next block will be Block E, will be on trade, capital flows, and multinational corporation. And then the next block will be managing post-industrial regions. And then we will look at different approaches to understand development. We'll see how we go. So this is something we can change as we go along, but we'll see how we go through the material first. So, but mainly we'll cover these in full, the first 2 blocks in detail, but then we'll see how we go, how we get on with the material. So in this block, factors of production in less developed countries or underdeveloped countries, we should know or assess how factors of production, land, capital, labor, aid or fail to aid development. So today we'll be talking mainly about agriculture. Also, we'll examine some models. You will see some models today as well. We'll look at some models, but we will focus mainly on how industrialization happen or take place. Okay. The next point, or the next thing that we should learn in this is the importance of agriculture and how for development and how it goes wrong. And most of the discussion today will be mainly about the role of agriculture in development. But then next lecture we'll be talking more about the barriers or the issues, the problems with agriculture, and how to sort this out and how to deal with these issues in developing or poor countries. So Yeah, so this is for this lecture. So for this lecture, as I said, we will talk about the role of agriculture and what types of contributions, what contributions agriculture bring or the agricultural sector bring to development, or how can, or how important the agriculture sector is for economic development. Oh, by the way, feel free to stop me at any time, okay? So I don't like just to keep talking all the lecture. I like people to stop me and ask questions if they want. And as I said, you don't have to ask a question. You might be just giving us a comment or something you want to share with the rest of the class. Okay, so these are the lectures in this block. So we have 4 lectures in block D. So as I said, we'll see how we get on with the material. So, but my intention is to have 4 lectures, but we'll see how we get on. Because we might just need 1 extra lecture, or we might just cover these in 3 lectures. So we'll see how it goes. But for today, I'll be talking mainly about the contribution of agriculture in development. The next lecture, I'll try to cover barriers to agriculture development, and then the rest of the lectures will be devoted mainly for the role of capital accumulation and human capital in development. Okay, do you have any questions? Are you usually that quiet? Does that mean you're paying attention? Okay, that's good. It's a good sign. Okay, so as I said today, I'll be focused on agriculture. And this is a very, very interesting topic to myself, because I grew up myself in a small village. So most of the stuff that we'll be talking about today, I actually witnessed, I experienced when I was young. So feel free to ask detailed questions about these things, because I know these things not through study only, but only because I live. This is the sort of environment I grew up in. I'm Egyptian, by the way, so it's a small village in Egypt. So still, we're talking about poor country or developing country. Egypt is it's a middle-income country. So it's because middle-income countries are 2 groups, so upper middle, lower middle. So Egypt is lower middle-income country. So just in case if you're wondering, have any of you been in Egypt before? Oh, that's a shame. Okay, next time we should say something about Egypt before we start to encourage you to visit Egypt. Okay, so today the role of agriculture, we will see that we'll focus mainly on the contribution of agriculture to development. But before that, I just want you to start the entering your details on Socrative. So please go to socrative.com. This is the room number. Is this the right module code? Okay, so this is the correct one. So hopefully, yeah, should work. So the first 3 questions are very basic questions. So the first question, as I said, I encourage people to enter their names. So that's not a question. And then the question, just please enter your email in case if you wanted me to email you back your responses, or you wanna, because you're not gonna have access to your responses after you log out of Socrative, but maybe let's say a few weeks later, you give me some responses and you thought, well, I actually did very well, engaged very well with this material, but I want a copy of my responses. So how can I do that? So the only way to do that, if you give me your email address. So so please put your email address. If you want to stay anonymous, that's fine, absolutely fine. So if you feel uncomfortable, if you want to say something, maybe why you don't want to visit Egypt, maybe, I don't know. Maybe why you don't agree with some of the things I say. So you want to, of course, I encourage you to do that, and you don't have to be anonymous to say that. But I'm saying maybe for whatever reason, you want to remain anonymous and you want to participate, so please do. So you don't have to. So your name or your email address, you don't have to enter them, but I do encourage you to do that. And I'm just explaining why, my reasons, why I want to be able to identify people, just in case if you want some feedback, if you want a copy of your responses, so I need to know who you are, okay? But it's fine if you're still not convinced that you should put your name on your email address. You don't have to. Just try to answer the first question, so you can answer these questions anonymously. So as I said, please, the first question, which is the main difference between development and growth. I know this is something that you've covered probably in the first semester, and this is something very basic question, but I just want to just warm up, just getting people back on track and just see what we're talking about here. So it's development. So try to give short answers, so you don't have to write long answers. So please 1-2 sentences maximum. So I'm not asking you to write a lot, but of course if you want to write more, that's fine. But please do engage with the online activities, the questions. As I said, that's very helpful. And also if you want to answer the questions and share your answer with others, with everyone in the class, so I'm happy to give you the opportunity to do this. Okay, so as you see, so the question is, what's the difference or the main difference between development and growth? Is it enough for an economy to grow, okay, to say, well, we're actually achieving or we're doing well in terms of development, or growth is not enough, there's more has to be done, more than just economic growth, okay? And the question here then, or the second question, which is third in this list, is how do we measure development? So we're talking about economics of development, so we focus mainly about development, and sometimes people just mix these two concepts, development and growth. So I just want to see or know your views on that, okay? And then how do we measure development? How can we say country A is doing well in terms of it's developing, is doing very well, and country B is not, okay? So we must be able to measure that somehow, okay? It's not an easy task, by the way, but, well, we do it somehow, okay? So I'm not going to answer these questions, but I give people like a few minutes, 2 minutes, just to respond to the question. But as I said, if anyone wants to share their views, their responses with the rest of us, please, they are welcome to do that, okay? So while you're answering the questions, these two questions, so I'm just gonna move on, because the introduction I wanted to give, because I'm going to talk mainly about agriculture and how agriculture is important to development. So I thought I should give you some overview, some introduction, why it is so. So all what you learned in the first semester about theories, different theories, the role of institutions or different types of institutions, all what you've learned, and even those theories that you might have not covered in the first semester, all these theories trying to explain one thing, only one thing, okay? So they are to explain why some societies developed sooner than others, or why development has not spread evenly across the globe. So why we see poor countries, why we see very rich countries at the same time, why some countries or some societies have experienced rapid increase in living standard while others still lagging behind. So this is, for example, the world map by income. I don't know how, let me just change the light setting. Maybe you can see it more the colors now, but if you can see it, so you will see it in the slides in your computers. So if you look at the red, the dark red is high income countries. The dark blue is low income countries. Where's the dark blue mainly? Low income countries, poor countries, or poorer countries. So mainly looking at Africa, some parts in Asia, okay? When you look at high income countries, you're looking at just mostly here, and there in Europe, okay? So why is that? So see, different experiences, and that is the question. That's what we try to answer through the whole module, not just the first semester. Okay, so you see different experiences, and that show you how development is not, or different parts in the world are not developed at the same pace, or didn't experience the same pace of development. And that's what we're trying to answer. So if you think about what we're doing in terms of reducing poverty, this graph, what you see here, show you the those who live or extreme poverty, who live on $1.9 per day, and of course this is at 2011 purchasing power parity, and these from 1981 till 2016, and what we see here, we see some sort of reduction in terms of the absolute number or the absolute poverty or extreme poverty. So if you're really interested in this, and this is one more thing to know about my notes. So whenever you see this, this is something to click. So this is something you click on this, it'll take you somewhere online. So you can read more about this. So if you go here on the poverty clock, that will take you to this screen where you can see the hopefully it will come up. Yes. So show you, so you can, this is like lots of data, so you can move this backward, and this will change all these statistics. So it show you the number of people who escaped poverty and where they come from, different places at different point in time, and also you can go here and see this on the map. Okay, so this is very like interactive map. So I encourage people to have fun with it. But anyway, so they just wanted to tell you about these buttons on my slides. Okay, so whenever you see these buttons, there's some extra resources or extra readings or maybe a video I wanted you to read or watch. Okay, so anyway, so as I said, so there's like there's so much effort to reduce poverty, but this is not enough. Because today we have 10% of global population live in extreme poverty. So when I talk about extreme poverty, I'm talking about $1.9 per day. Why am I talking about this? You will know in a second. This is again by region. So if you look at this is as a head count ratio, okay. And again, this is about poverty line, $1.9 per day. If you see what happened between 2013 and 2015, there are some improvements somewhere in some regions. Some other regions didn't do well. Like for example, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, maybe it's not that well. But if you compare this to maybe East Asia and Pacific, so they've done much better. So different experiences in how we do with poverty, reducing poverty or fighting poverty. Okay, so there must be reasons why, and that is mainly because there are constraints at play. These constraints could be political, economic, and you've done already some of these. You studied some of these constraints in the first semester. Okay, so what I want you to tell me on Socrative, just some examples of any constraints on development that you think of. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether these are political constraints, economic constraints, values or cultural constraints or whatever. Just give me a few examples of what you think, why we see this picture. Okay, why, although these efforts that you see, there's some success here, but still we have 10% of global population, 10% in extreme poverty, because there are different types of poverty, by the way. So we're just talking about the extreme poverty, okay, which again, $1.9 per day, okay? That's how they live on $1.9 per day, or less than $1.9 per day. Okay. So what I'm asking now, I just want to know your views. What types of constraint? But there must be something that, or so many constraints that actually not helping in addressing this question, which is why some countries are doing well and others are not. Again, it's just because of the context, and these constraints could be political, economic, or any other type of constraint, but this is what I want you to tell me about. Okay? So, why again we're talking about this? You will know in a second, but obviously, whatever we talk about, when we talk about factors of production and how they help or hinder development, so how much they aid or fail to aid development. So basically, we're talking about these constraints. Okay, so this is the relation. This is where I'm coming from. Okay, so while you're answering this again, you don't have to write much, as I said. Just a few examples will be fine. This is a picture to show you where do the poor live, because we see 10% of the global population are poor or live in extreme poverty. So the question, where are they? Okay, we saw on the map that the blue color is very clear, concentrated in some areas. Okay, so this is where they are. Okay, but what is more, if we even look into this in more detail, you will see where they live. Most of these, if you compare urban and rural areas, 80% of extreme poverty, or the extremely poor, live in rural area. So now you see probably where I'm coming from. Okay, when I talk about the role of agriculture and development, why is it important? Because 80% of the poor live in rural area. So there must be a problem, yeah? There must be some issues here we need to think about in depth. So that is the idea. So this is where I'm coming from. Again, these are like extra reading. So if you are interested in poverty reduction, what the World Bank is doing, what other international institutions are doing in terms of fighting poverty, different statistics, up-to-date actually statistics, which is really good. So something I suggest that you read. But for the moment, for this moment now, just what I'm focusing on is that where do the poor live? The poor live in rural areas, okay, mainly. So we're talking about 80%. That's extreme poverty. So if you have a less restrictive definition, so probably you have the moderate poor, again 75%. So this again, when you compare the blue line here is non-poor on the other graph. So these are non-poor compared to extreme poor, and this is as a percentage again. So majority of these live in of poor people live in rural area. So that gives you some hint about the importance of agriculture, because this is the main activity or economic activity in rural areas, or in most of these areas. This is again a more detailed graph. So the first one here, the first column here, show you these bars here, show you the children as share of all children. So 44% of that's the global number. So these are different regions. So 44% are in extreme poverty of the children. 44.5% of the poor children are in extreme poverty. Here, these are the share of adults who never attended a formal school. So it's not surprising that you see 40% are in extreme poverty. So that will explain. We'll talk about education when we talk about human capital. Okay, and in a separate lecture. But what I'm interested in is to look at the who live in rural areas. So 80% of the extreme poor live in rural areas. If you look at the global level, if you look at East Asia and Pacific, you'll see 74%. If you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, you're talking about 82%. So on average, about 80% of the poor live in rural areas. Okay? So you might be living in a rural area, but you're not engaged with any agricultural activities, okay, or any activities in agriculture. So the last one here show you the percentage or the share of adults working in agriculture. Okay, so that tell us that 65% of those extreme poor, they basically rely on agriculture or farming. Okay, and that's where exactly I'm coming from. Why agriculture is important when you study development. Okay, so look at the number of the poor. Yes, we acknowledge, we recognize the efforts that are made to fight, or the success in fighting poverty, but it's not enough. Have 10% of the population, the global population, live in extreme poverty. Okay, but the question, where are they? They are in rural areas. mostly work in agriculture sector. Okay, so there must be some issues here related to the agriculture sector. So we will talk about these issues or these barriers mainly in the next lecture, in the coming lecture, but what we talk about today is the importance of the agriculture sector, how the agriculture sector or how a healthy agriculture sector will help, will support development. Next lecture, we'll talk about how it does not. In reality, how it does not. What are the problems? What are the issues? So we'll talk about mainly about the issues next time, but today we'll talk more about the contribution. How the agriculture sector, how agriculture is very important to development. So hopefully from these statistics, from these lovely figures and different fancy colors, hopefully now you understand where I'm coming from, what I'm trying to say. So the point I'm trying to raise here is how important to understand the role of agriculture in development and how it fails to support or what are the barriers, what are the problems, what are the issues. So this lecture will be mainly talking about the contribution or the importance of agriculture in development. Next lecture I'll be talking about the problems. Okay, so we'll talk about the problems, we'll talk about how to address these problems as well. So we'll discuss these in the next lecture. But this lecture now, hopefully now we understand that the health of agriculture sector is very critical factor, especially at early stage of development. Okay, and it's not a surprise. It's not a coincidence that old or ancient civilization, like in Egypt and Iraq, all these civilization, they started when they settled around the rivers banks, when they start learning about farming and agriculture. Okay, so it all starts there. Okay, so development of agriculture sector is a prerequisite, if you want to say, for rapid economic development. So if you want development, then you need to understand what stop or what prevent the agriculture sector from developing. So you need to address any issues with the agriculture sector. Theoretically speaking, we already know, hopefully you're familiar with this, Rostow's model, different stage of development. Here is the model. So the surplus in agriculture, so basically in the traditional society in stage 1, so this is very poor society, very primitive, very traditional society. So basically it's based on subsistence and bartering, etc., and agriculture. But then you start having surpluses, you start having developing agriculture. So it is like a condition to move to the takeoff stage, where we move toward industrialization. So we develop the industrial sector. Okay, so to develop the industrial sector, you need the agriculture sector, and we'll explain in detail today how. But theoretically speaking now, so we saw the numbers, we saw where the poor live, but also from theory we know from Rostow growth model that a healthy agriculture sector or development in agriculture sector is a precondition, it's a condition for or a prerequisite for the takeoff stage. So that's where most countries want to be, and then they move to maturity and then high mass consumption. So the highest level of development. Okay, so agriculture is important, and that is the main message. So what is the contribution of agriculture then? How agriculture contribute to development? Okay, so there are four major contributions of agriculture to economic development. So these what we're going to cover in detail. So production contribution, so as a product, as a factor of production, as a market, and also as a source of foreign exchange, foreign currency. Okay, so there are four main contributions that agriculture make for in supporting or fail to support development. As I said, as a product first, okay, as a factor of production, as a market for industrial product, and also as a source of foreign exchange. So let's talk about the first one. So the most obvious factor is food. Everyone needs food. I didn't say wants. Everyone needs food. Okay, to survive, you need food. Okay, so whether you are working in agriculture sector or industrial sector or any other activities, so agriculture need to feed everyone. So the agriculture sector need to feed everyone, whether they are working in agriculture sector or not. That's why we say that must supply food above subsistence level. Okay, so not just to feed those who work in agriculture, but you need to feed everyone else. Okay, so that is very, very important. So you cannot import even. So the difference, if you need extra or you need more food, if you need more raw material, so you can't even import these before you start exporting. And what you export in the beginning or at early stage of development is primarily is likely to be agriculture products. Okay, so this is very important. Again, you can watch the video next time. Sorry, when you open these slides later. But I'm not going to play the video now, but you can watch it. It's more about subsistence farming and what that means. But this map shows you some places where some sort of subsistence farming still exists till today. But I'll skip that. But the main point here is supply food. So we need food, whether you work in agriculture sector or in any other sector. So supply food is important, and that must be above subsistence needs, because agriculture needs to feed everyone else, not just those who live in rural areas, also those who live in urban areas. Examples from the past: industrialization in Britain, or Britain was the first country to witness the Industrial Revolution because of significant agricultural revolution. Okay, even if you look at the history of the U.S., if you look at in the 19th century, so the U.S. was not an industrial power. It became industrial power in 20th century, beginning of the 20th century. Before that, again, was a major factor of development in the US, which we see a superpower today. That's like we're talking about the biggest economy in the world today, is started as based on agriculture. Okay, so the same thing here in the UK. The significant agricultural revolution facilitated this sort of industrial revolution. That was based on, of course, higher levels of productivity in the agriculture sector. That means it will provide food, and that food, the extra food or supply food to support the industrial expansion. So as I said, this must be or has to be above the subsistence level. This is from the World Development Report 2008. So I'm just quoting here. Agriculture growth was the precursor to the industrial revolutions that spread across the world from England to Japan. So just to, there's something called to recognize the importance of agriculture even for industry, so for the industrial sector. So that's what we call the marketable surplus. So that's the difference between the total agricultural output and the subsistence needs. So we want the surplus to increase. Okay, so the difference between the total output and the total agricultural output and subsistence needs, that's what is known as marketable surplus. So economic growth requires larger marketable surplus. Remember, we're talking about the first contribution of agriculture sector to development. So number one, you need to increase the marketable surplus, again, which is the difference between total agriculture output and subsistence needs. And to do this, if you notice then, probably you have thought about that the size or the size of land is fixed, so it's something that we can't change. Then we need to increase labor productivity, okay? Because you have farmers, you have land, but if the land is fixed, then you need to, we'll discuss this in more detail. But fixed supply of land, this is an issue that causes diminishing returns, which we'll discuss in a few minutes. But so far, as I said, this is very important. So the marketable surplus, that's what we need for economic development. And this has to happen through increasing productivity in agriculture. And that could happen naturally okay, through maybe technological discovery like a new irrigation method, or maybe through the state or the government, or sometimes it is forcibly extracted, like some examples in the past in Japan and in the Soviet Union 1920s. Okay, so there are some examples of this in the past, but in general, what we want is the increased productivity in agriculture. So the marketable surplus to rise, so it should rise, because if it doesn't rise, when the demand for food increases, what will happen to the price of food? The food prices will increase. So it will be expensive for everyone to buy food, and also it will be expensive for industry, okay, for the industrial sector to buy raw material, because where the raw material come from for the industrial sector come from agriculture. Okay, so that is the problem. Okay, so higher food prices mean higher wages. That means in industry or the industrial sector need to pay workers higher wages, and that means less profit, means less capital accumulation. Okay, so less investment. Okay, so that harms the development even in the industrial sector. And as I said, the bottom line here is that we need to increase the marketable surplus. Okay, so to support the industrial sector. This is what we call the terms of trade against industry. If the marketable surplus does not increase to meet the demand for food, that means the price of food will increase against the industry. So that means the terms of trade are not in favor of the industrial sector. Okay, so again, there's something more you can read about this if you want to. Okay, so when do you like to have a break? Not now. I'm asking now. I'm not asking right now. I'm saying, when do you usually have a break? 3 o'clock. Okay. Okay, so we have 5 more minutes. Okay. Okay, so the first contribution is product contribution. So to summarize what I said about the product contribution, let me remind you what we're talking about, okay, before you go to the break. So what we're talking about here is, one, all theories in economic development, or in economics of development, mainly try to answer why we have different experiences, why some countries are rich, or some others are poor, or still struggling behind. Okay, then we asked where the poor live. We found out that the poor live mainly in rural area, and not just that, they actually involved mainly in agriculture activities. Okay, so there's something about agriculture. We said today we'll talk about the importance of agriculture, or the role of agriculture in development, why agriculture is important to economic development, or what role agriculture plays in economic development. Next time we'll talk about the problems, the issues. So we said there are 4 contributions for the agriculture sector toward development. So one, which we covered in this half, is the product contribution. So as a product, okay? So the most obvious example is food, okay? Everyone needs food. And what we need is to increase the marketable surplus, okay? So if you miss the whole, or this the first half of the lecture, this is everything that we said so far, okay? So any question you have about the first half, or about anything we said about what is the difference between development and growth? How do we measure development? The question that we had on Socrative, for example, or any other, or any question about anything we covered in this half. Do you have any questions? I always say, if there are no questions, that's like 2 things, like one of 2 things might be the case. So one, that you understand everything very well, so you don't need to ask questions, or you didn't really understand much of what I said, so you don't want to ask questions. So it's like 2 extremes. But anyway, so I'm hoping that you understand what I said very well. So anyway, so the factor production here, we talk about 2 things. The providing labor okay, to the industrial sector. Remember, we're focusing on industrialization, okay? So now we covered the food, or the how agriculture provide food or provide or as a product, but there are two more things, or two more contribution through the factor of production. So it could be labor, can provide labor, also can provide savings for capital accumulation. Okay, so in terms of the first one, the labor contribution, so labor for industry has to come from agriculture sector. Okay, and we'll see how that work, at least from a theoretical point of view in this lecture. But because if you think about it, if you have fixed size of land, so the supply of land doesn't expand, it's not gonna get bigger or larger for any reason, or maybe sometimes, of course, if we are able to have some like improvement, but whatever improvement or in technology that allow you to farm different or more lands or expand the area that you farm, you still fix it. It's not, you still have limited supply of land. So the main idea here is that with population growth, you have more people on that land. So you want to take these people out, okay, to the agriculture sector, to the industrial sector and other sectors as well. Because if everyone is just working in agriculture, then that means we have low level of productivity, and we'll see in a few minutes on the second half of the lecture that might even cause the productivity to become zero. So that means that you are participating in economic activity, but you're adding or you're contributing zero. Okay? And some cases, some people argue it can even be minus. So your contribution actually is negative, meaning that actually you're hindering, you're not supporting the output process in any way. Actually, you are against, or you're not, you're slowing it down, and you're not very helpful. So anyway, so as I said, so start with labor contribution. So labor for industry and other activities mainly come from agriculture, and you can release only labor if productivity increases. So you see, we're going back to the idea of productivity in agriculture. So to increase the marketable surplus, you need to increase productivity. Okay, to be able to provide labor for industry and other activities, then you need to increase productivity in agriculture. Okay, so that is the bottom line here. So it's very important. Okay, so I think let's stop at this point, because next one will talk about, like, theoretically explain one of the models that showed how transferring labor from the agriculture sector to the industrial sector, how that helped development. Okay, so we'll talk about this in the second half. How long would you like to have the break? Not half an hour, okay? 10 minutes, okay? So I'll see you in 10 minutes. Do you have any question before you go? So let's just carry on with what we started in the first half of this lecture. We were talking about the role of agriculture in industry or in industrialization, and we covered the first contribution, which is product contribution, so as a product. But now we're talking about labor contribution or factor contribution, and the first one is labor contribution. There's one very important model that explained this, and this model was by Arthur Lewis. It's called dual sector model, and that's probably one of the most famous articles in economics. Okay, and it's called Economic Development with Unlimited Supplies of Labor. That was 1954. If you're interested to read the article, just click on that link, read more. So what is the idea here? So let's just remember the idea. Remember, we have so many people on a small land that is not expandable, or we can't extend, or it's fixed supply of land. So productivity is an issue, and to do that, we said we need to transfer those labor or workers from the agriculture sector to the industrial sector, so increasing productivity in the agriculture sector. And this is more or less the essence of, or the basic idea here. So in this model, or in his model, in Arthur Lewis model, is we have a dual economy where we have two sectors. Okay, one is the subsistence sector, so it's mainly the agriculture, and the other one, which is the capitalist sector. The capitalist sector might not be just the industrial sector, might be more, but let's just think of it as agriculture and industry because it's just more convenient. So the subsistence sector, or the agriculture sector, has unlimited supply of labor, so that in the sense that supply of labor is more than demand. So we have more labor than we need in the agriculture sector. So that means the marginal productivity of labor, meaning the contribution of every or each extra unit of labor, extra worker that join that fixed area of land, will be dropping or will be declining because of that. Okay, and the marginal productivity of labor will be somewhere equal or less than the subsistence wage, so hardly enough to cover their basic needs. So that's what I was talking about. So the productivity, or the marginal productivity of labor, is probably zero or negative. And again, because of these distinguished features of agriculture, fixity of the supply of land, so we have fixed supply of land, and that means the output subject to diminishing returns, meaning that every time you add an additional worker, that means the contribution of that worker will be less than the previous one. So this will be declining. But how far it will go, or how far it will decline, it might go to zero. So that means you adding more people to that land, but those people do not really contribute, so their contribution is zero, and in some cases might be even negative. And this is exactly what this graph shows. I don't know how clear that is on the screen, but let me just again see if I can change this. Don't know if that's better or not, but I can see it better now. So what we see here is the unit of labor on added to land on the horizontal axis. On the marginal, on the vertical axis, you have the marginal product of labor. So as you can see, this increases the marginal, so the productivity of those workers increases up to X. So this is the number of labor or number of workers on this land, and then it start declining. And as you see, this point here, which is at X1, this exactly equal the subsistence wage. And if you increase, or if you add more workers to this land, then that means the marginal productivity of labor will be less or lower than the subsistence wage, and it will reach zero at some point, and some cases might be even negative. So the main idea in this model, in Arthur Lewis model, if this is the industrial or capitalist sector, where the marginal productivity take this shape, so NR is the marginal productivity of labor in the industrial sector. So if workers in the industrial sectors are paid W, so this is the level of wage for the industrial sector, compared to W1, which is the subsistence wage in agriculture sector. So that means the industrial sector will be employing M. So this is the number of workers at this point. Why? Because to maximize profit in the capitalist sector, so the marginal productivity, which in this graph in R, should equal the wage. So that means it's P. P here is the equilibrium point, meaning this is where profit is maximized for the capitalist sector. So what's happened here? If you see about this, so if we have, what if we, for some reason, we employed more than M, so more workers. So what would happen? That means those workers will earn what they would have received in the subsistence sector. So they will receive less wages, but still you will see some differences. So for example, if it is M1, you will be somewhere here, so which is still above the subsistence wage, but these differences will be for the higher cost of living in town or in urban areas, and also for job uncertainty. So they're not going to be better off after M. So this is the equilibrium point in that case. So we have M, this is the number of labor at this wage, and if this is the productivity or the marginal productivity. So the idea here is that the industrial wage, if you notice here, W is above the subsistence wage. So if it's above the wage in the in the agriculture sector, okay, and that's why sometimes it is in the capitalist's interest that holding down productivity in the subsistence sector, because they want this difference. Okay, so why? Because they have cheap raw material, and also they can employ. They don't have to increase the wages that they pay for those who work in the industrial sector. So, but what is the main point here? So the main point is this area here, NWP. This is the main point in this model, which is the surplus. How much the capitalists earn, or how much profit they make. It is the difference between the wage and this. How much? This is this area, which I'm highlighting here. So it's NWP or WPN, or whatever you want to say it. WNP is there. So this is the surplus. This area is the wage. So how much they pay workers in the industrial sector. So this, what happened to this surplus? Call it profits if you want. So what happened to the profits they make in the industrial sector? They reinvest it in the industrial sector. Okay. So if these profits, or if this surplus were to be invested again or reinvested in the industrial sector, that will cause this shift in productivity level. You see, moving productivity, but assuming that wages are constant or fixed. So wages are not changing. Why wages are not changing? Because we have unlimited supply of labor in the subsistence sector. Okay, so there's no pressure on wages. So it doesn't matter. You can employ any number of workers. Okay, that's what it means at that level, at that wage level. Okay, because we have unlimited supply of labor in the subsistence sector. So in that case, given that wage is not going to change, and we reinvest the surplus, the capitalist surplus, that means productivity will shift from NR to N1R R1. So how much is the surplus now? So given that the wage is not changing, so now you see what happened to the surplus. So the surplus now became from WNP, it became WN1P1. So it became larger. Okay, and how many workers we employ? M1. So now we absorb, or we take in more workers. Where they come from? The subsistence sector. You remember there's unlimited supply of labor there. There's so many people there need jobs. Okay, their productivity is nearly zero. Their contribution to the subsistence sector is nearly zero or even negative. Okay, so bringing them in to the industrial sector is not going to harm. Actually, it's going to help the subsistence sector to improve its productivity, because more people are leaving who are not contributing much, so they're leaving. Okay, and they're going to the industrial sector where they are needed. And that is the whole point. Okay, so now we employ M1 rather than M, because now we have a larger surplus, capitalist surplus, and this process keep going on. So it continues. That is the idea of Arthur Lewis model, the dual economy model. So again, you have this surplus, capitalist surplus, and reinvesting that surplus will, given that the wage is fixed, the wage is not changing, and the reason the wage doesn't change here because of the unlimited supply of labor in the subsistence sector. So whatever, it doesn't matter how you can employ as many people as you want, okay, as long as there is a surplus in or unlimited supply in the subsistence sector, then wage is not going to change. In the industrial sector, is not going to change. Okay, and that means more profit for capitalists, and that means if they reinvest it, if they reinvest these profits, that means the marginal productivity of labor will increase, and that means more profits. So again, reinvest, more profit, you absorb more workers. So when this process is going to stop? When that surplus disappear, yeah? So because we have unlimited supply of labor in the subsistence sector, so when we take all those extra or those who their productivity, marginal productivity is below the subsistence wage, then all these labor now move to the industrial sector. This is what Arthur Lewis called the turning point. This is where exactly where now, once the productivity of labor or marginal productivity of labor in the subsistence sector increases or become above wages, that means it is in the subsistence sector interest to employ people. So they compete with the industrial sector now to employ more people, and then at that time wage will increase. Okay, so at early stages wage doesn't change because of the unlimited supply of labor, because so many people on that fixed area or land. Okay, so many of them have marginal productivity below the wage, the subsistence wage, or even zero. Okay, some even argue that it could be minus. Okay, so they don't contribute at all, they actually adding negative, meaning they actually cause this drop in total output. But anyway, so because you have so many people in a small land, so that is the whole idea. So all what I'm saying here is exactly what I said now is about the turning point. But just to comment on what or highlight what Lewis himself commented in 1945, he said, why developed countries save? If we ask it, why developing countries save so little, it is not because they are so poor, it's because their capitalist sector is so small. Okay, so we want to increase the surplus all the time. So the idea, increase that surplus and reinvest that surplus. This is what is going to help development or increasing productivity, and that is the main point. Okay, so just to summarize here, before we talk about, to just sum up the whole idea. So we're talking about the contribution, how agriculture contribute toward industrialization or toward development. Okay, so we're talking about factor contribution. Factor contribution, mainly we mean by factor contribution, we mean two things: labor contribution and savings. We'll talk about savings and capital accumulation now, but we'll start first with labor contribution. Okay, we said that labor that engage in industrial sector or join the industrial sector, they come from the agriculture sector. And Arthur Lewis model is one of the most famous models, most cited models still today in economics, talking about this process. Okay, that again to explain how development can happen, how agriculture or this transition, this movement between from the agriculture sector, the low productivity sector, to the higher productivity sector, how this sort of transition, how this sort of movement will help the development process to keep going. Okay, so the whole idea in the agriculture sector you have, or in the subsistence sector, you have subsistence wage. The productivity of those who work there is less than this subsistence wage, so they don't really contribute much. Some argue they contribute zero. Okay, on the industrial in the industrial sector you have a higher wage, so you have this W1 here in this graph. Okay, and that's what so you have this W in this graph. So W1 is the subsistence wage. So by moving those who are contribute less or contribute zero or have contribution that is less than what they earn, which is the subsistence wage, when they move those workers to the industrial wage, industrial sector, you're actually helping the industrial sector, given that wage is not going to change, you're helping the industrial sector to accumulate profits or to make more surplus, and that surplus will be reinvested, and that will increase productivity, and that means will allow to absorb more workers or take in more workers from the subsistence sector, and this is the development process. So this is how the development will keep going until one point which Arthur Lewis called the turning point. What's the turning point? Is exactly that point when you absorb, you're taking so many from the agricultural sector at that point where the marginal productivity of labor, so this is how much every additional or the additional unit of labor is contributing toward the output, the total output. When that is equal wages, or the subsistence wages will become above, so that now they become more productive, then the subsistence sector will start compete for those workers, and at that point wage will increase. Some argue that today China is an example of that turning point, where we start seeing where we had in the past unlimited supply of labor working in the agriculture sector, and today wages are rising in China. But others think that doesn't have to be the case, because we still have reserves of labor in agriculture sector in China, and also the labor productivity is less than 20% compared to the rest of the economy in China. So this is some kind of debate, so there's no clear answer to that question. So whether China now is witnessing this sort of turning point, okay, or not yet. Okay, so some argue yes, because we see wages increasing in China, but in the same time, because we still have reserves of labor in the agriculture sector, and also because the labor productivity is still less than 20% in the agriculture sector, so some argues that this is not the turning point which Arthur Lewis tried to explain. But regardless of this, what's happening today, the main point here is to explain how agriculture can contribute to development as a factor of production by providing labor. Okay, so moving labor from low productivity activities to activities with higher level of productivity. That's the bottom line. Okay, so regardless of how Arthur Lewis tried to explain that, that is the whole story. Okay, moving workers from activities with where they have low productivity to other activities where they have higher levels of productivity, where there's higher levels of productivity, and that is the main point. Is this clear? Going back to be quiet again. So hopefully that is okay. We'll know at the end. So anyway, so this is just again a summary of what I said about what the whole model is trying to say. So the dual sector model, dual economy. We have surplus labor in subsistence sector, and fixed wages in the subsistence sector, in the industrial sector, which is above the subsistence wage. And the growth of this economy will depend on reinvesting the capitalist surplus, which will absorb more labor from the subsistence sector until we reach the turning point. Okay, where when wages will rise. So that is the whole point in this model. Okay, now it's just time to see if you're following me or not. So let's go back please on Socrative and tell me what we mean by what's meant by marketable surplus. Okay, do you remember what's a marketable surplus? Anyone wants to tell us what is marketable surplus? You remember? So when we talk about the role of agriculture, or the contribution of agriculture as a product, so the product contribution, we talked about the marketable surplus, and we said we want this to increase. Okay, so please just go on Productive and tell me what is meant by marketable surplus and why is it important for development. Okay. So what we covered so far now is, again, the contribution. So product contribution. The second one is factor contribution. The factor contribution, we said it could be labor. We explain how. You used Arthur Lewis model to explain that. And the second way that agriculture can contribute to development as a factor of production could be through savings or capital contribution. Okay, so agriculture also can be a source of saving and capital accumulation, and this can of course boost the industrial sector, and this can happen either voluntarily. So you can have rich landlords, rich landowners. They voluntarily invest in industrial activities, like the case in Britain during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so you have rich landowners, they reinvest in industrial activities, or maybe like peasant farmers investing in small savings in rural banks. This is voluntarily saving. So again, this is as a source how agriculture can contribute to development as a factor contribution, or what we call factor contribution, which is also can be part of capital accumulation. Or it can happen involuntarily through taxation. So the government can do that, taxing the agriculture sector and use the revenues for investment, or what they call marketing boards. Again, taking the products from the farmers or buying the products at prices that is lower than the market. So this is like another way of taxing agriculture. Or we talked about forced extraction before during in the Soviet Union in 1920s. So this is the second one. So there are we talked about two contribution now: product contribution and factor contribution. So hopefully it's clear by now how important agriculture to development through contributing as a product and as a factor. Agriculture also represent a market for the industrial sector. Okay, so what we mean by that, and the demand side, if you think about it, okay, so there's demand from agriculture sector which can provide market for output of industrial sector, especially if we don't export yet. Okay, so at early stage it could be, or probably is, the largest market for industrial goods. And I'm quoting here from the World Development Report 1979. A stagnant rural economy with low purchasing power holds back industrial growth in many developing countries. Okay, so people who live in rural area, of course, there's a market for industrial products. Okay, so it's very important. If this part in the country or in the economy is developed, that means it will provide market for output of these industries. So this is from the demand side. There is one exception could be from to this, which is in countries or economies that are mineral based, because there are other sources of revenue that can create market for industrial products. But these are exception. So the rule is that agriculture sector provide or is the largest market for industrial goods at early stages. This is another quote from the World Development Report in 1982. Faster growing industry and sluggish agriculture were evident only, so this can happen only, in countries with oil or mineral-based economies such as Algeria, Ecuador, Mexico, Morocco, and Nigeria. So apart from these exceptions, you can't have development in the industrial sector without a healthy agriculture sector, because the agriculture sector provide a market for the products that are produced in the industrial sector. So this is the demand side. Okay, in the same time, there's a supply side. But before I go to the supply side, can you briefly, very quickly, just want to make sure that you're following, what do we mean by the turning point? Just briefly on Socrative. So again, we already talked about the demand side, how the agriculture sector can be provide a market for industrial goods. That's the demand side. It also can represent from the supply side. It provides raw material and cheaper inputs. So that means this has some implication on pricing agricultural goods. Why? because, and that was actually a general policy in developing countries, that keeping agriculture prices low, because this might benefit or should benefit industry from two ways. One is because it provides low price inputs, so cheap food and cheap inputs, but also this argument is supported based on the notion or the idea that peasant farmers have limited horizon, meaning they don't respond to incentives because they looking for fixed income. So once they have this income, so they don't really, so they drop the number of hours they work, and that's what we call backward lending supply curve. And by the way, this is not, there's no evidence of that. So this is what I'm showing you. So these are in the horizontal axis, the number of hours worked. On the vertical axis, that's wage. So this is the supply curve. So the quantity or the number of hours would increase as wage increase at some point, till this point, then becomes backward bending that way, which means if you increase wage above W, that means they will work less. Why? The main idea here, because they work for a fixed income. So once, if prices are higher, then farmers may produce less. But again, there's no empirical evidence of that. And this such policy, which was aiming to, which aims to keep agriculture prices low in order to help industrial sector, is actually causing damages to the agriculture sector. And this sort of idea of backward bending supply curve, there's no evidence of that. So now if we think about the prices, because from the supply side, yes, there are some benefits to the industrial sector of having or accessing cheap product, cheap food prices, or cheap food and cheap inputs. So if you think about it, low farm prices, good for industry, that's the supply side, cheaper raw material, that means cheaper input, and that means more profit. But on the other side, it's bad for industry. Why? Because that means low farm purchasing power. So people who live in rural areas or who are engaged with agriculture activities, they are not able to, or they don't have, their purchasing power is not high enough. So that means less demand on agriculture and on industrial goods. Sorry. So that argument based on this is not that we should keep agriculture products or agriculture prices low. It is where the equilibrium is where we want to be. So from one side, well, yes, low agriculture products is good for industry, but on the other side, it is bad for industry. So we need some equilibrium point, and this is what I'm trying to explain in this graph. So GI here is the growth in industrial sector. GA is the growth in the agriculture sector. So we want to reach that point. So we don't want the prices too high, the food prices or the agriculture prices too high, and we don't want them to be too low. So we want them to be at this G star here, where we maximize growth, okay, in both sectors. So the industrial sector is not constrained, but if we have the prices at P1, which is higher than the equilibrium point, that means the industrial growth is demand constrained to G1. So it's not going to be G star, it's going to be G1. If we have the agriculture prices too high, too low, this one, so then it will be constrained from this one, it'll be constrained at G2, okay? So in both cases, so we don't want P1, we don't want P2, so we don't want the food price to be too high or too low. We want somewhere like where equilibrium is. And that is how we maximize the growth in the industrial sector, okay? Why? Because the effect here goes in the opposite direction, okay? So as we said, low prices, farm prices, good and bad in the same time for industrial sector, okay? Any questions? I promise I'll finish in a few minutes. But any questions? Okay. So the last one, which is very straightforward. So before I jump to the last one, so the three main contribution now we covered: product contribution, factor contribution, supplying labor and savings, and also market contribution. So we'll talk about the demand and the supply side. The last one is the foreign exchange contribution, which is very straightforward. Foreign exchange, the source of foreign exchange means that at early stage of development, the only source of foreign currency or foreign exchange is likely to be commodity exports, primary commodity exports. And fixed foreign exchange is a resource like savings. So we want this, okay? So you can't import if you don't have, if you don't export, if you don't have foreign currency, okay? If you don't have foreign exchange. And the lack of foreign exchange actually is one of the major restrictions on economic growth in developing countries anyway. So agriculture sector can provide this. So it can provide exports that bring in foreign exchange. This is just the final thing. So this is the whole idea here. So for foreign exchange contribution, so these are the four types of contributions, or four ways, or how agriculture can contribute to development. Product, I'll just say them in the same order. So product contribution, factor contribution, market contribution, and foreign exchange contribution. Okay. The last slide here, which is this one, it just shows you some how the growth in agriculture sector, how it contribute to economic growth, based on some study here. And this on different countries like Ghana, and I think there was Ethiopia, and and Rwanda. Yeah, there. So it shows you how, with additional growth from agriculture, how growth is going to be, or how this is going to add to economic growth within those countries. So this is real, based on real data. They've done some simulations, and they, based on their model, this is what they forecast. This is what they tell us. But again, this is just an empirical evidence to show that again, agriculture can contribute to growth and development. So we talked about the contribution as four contribution: product, factor contribution, product contribution, factor contribution, market contribution, and foreign exchange contribution. And also empirical evidence tell us the same. There is empirical evidence to support this. Do you have any questions? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, let's just, this is what we covered in this lecture, as I said. So we give an overview. We looked at where the poor live, and this I tried to discuss this with you because I wanted you to know that most of the poor are engaged in agriculture sector. They live in the rural area. That's why agriculture is important for development. And then we discussed the role of agriculture. In the tutorial, the tutorials are every other week or every week? Every other week, yeah? Okay, anyway, I'll email you. I'll post on when exactly the tutorial will start, but probably it's next week. If not, I'll email you anyway. So I just don't want to say something and then forget. So I'll email you if we're starting next week. Okay, so anyway, but whatever the start is, so whenever we start the tutorial, so please read before you come. This is the question that we're going to discuss. So you have an article here, an essay by one of the very popular economists. And what I want you to do is just to read that essay carefully and then answer some questions based on that essay. The second question is to use some data. Again, this is a video to show you how to download data from the World Bank database. So I recorded that video myself 2 years ago, maybe last year, I remember. But it is there on Hanomics, my YouTube channel. So you can watch that if you don't know how to download data, real data from the World Bank databases or websites. So it shows you how to do that. So what the question asks you to do is just to go there, download some data, and try to discuss some facts about economic growth in different developing countries. So this is mainly the tasks, the two tasks that hopefully we'll discuss during the tutorials next time. And in the lecture next week, we will talk about the barriers to agriculture development, land reform, and agriculture productivity. And as I said today, we talked mainly about the contribution of agriculture, how important agriculture can be to development. But next time we'll talk about the problems, issues, etc., which is something I'm looking forward to, because as I said, I was born in a rural place in a small village, so I really I have seen what these barriers are, not just studied them. Okay, so this is where you can, if you want to read about this lecture, so you can go to this chapter 5 in this book as well. Before you go, please, so I asked you if you have a question, you didn't ask me any questions. I want you to do this on Socrative. This is something I do with all my students. Please be open about anything you like or you don't like.